6. What then is world history? Certainly an ordered presentation of the past, an inner postulate, the expression of a capacity for feeling form. But a feeling for form, however definite, is not the same as form itself. No doubt we feel world history, experience it, and believe that it is to be read just as a map is read. But even today, it is only forms of it that we know, and not the form of it, which is the mirror image of our own inner life. Everyone, of course, if asked, would say that he saw the inward form of history quite clearly and definitely. The illusion subsists because no one has seriously reflected on it, still less conceived doubts as to his own knowledge, for no one has the slightest notion how wide a field for doubt there is. In fact, the layout of world history is an unproved and subjective notion that has been handed down from generation to generation, not only of laymen but of professional historians, and stands badly in need of a little of that scepticism which, from Galileo onward, has regulated and deepened our inborn ideas of nature. Thanks to the subdivision of history into ancient, medieval, and modern, an incredibly jejune and meaningless scheme, which has, however, entirely dominated our historical thinking, we have failed to perceive the true position in the general history of higher mankind of the little part-world which has developed on West European soil from the time of the German Roman Empire, to judge of its relative importance, and above all, to estimate its direction. Footnote. Here the historian is gravely influenced by preconceptions derived from geography, which assumes a continent of Europe, and feels himself compelled to draw an ideal frontier corresponding to the physical frontier between Europe and Asia. The word Europe ought to be struck out of history. There is historically no European type, and it is sheer delusion to speak of the Hellenes as European antiquity. Were Homer and Heraclitus and Pythagoras then Asiatics? And to enlarge upon their mission as such. These phrases express no realities, but merely a sketchy interpretation of the map. It is thanks to this word Europe alone, and the complex of ideas resulting from it, that our historical consciousness has come to link Russia with the West in an utterly baseless unity, a mere abstraction derived from the reading of books that has led to immense real consequences. In the shape of Peter the Great, this word has falsified the historical tendencies of a primitive human mass for 2 centuries, whereas the Russian instinct has very truly and fundamentally divided Europe from Mother Russia, with the hostility that we can see embodied in Tolstoy, Aksakov, or Dostoevsky. East and West are notions that contain real history, whereas Europe is an empty sound. Everything great that the classical world created, it created in pure denial of the existence of any continental barrier between Rome and Cyprus, Byzantium and Alexandria. Everything that we imply by the term European culture came into existence between the Vistula and the Adriatic and the Guadalquivir, and even if we were to agree that Greece, the Greece of Pericles, lay in Europe, the Greece of today certainly does not. End of footnote. The cultures that are to come will find it difficult to believe that the validity of such a scheme, with its simple rectilinear progression and its meaningless proportions, becoming more and more preposterous with each century, incapable of bringing into itself the new fields of history as they successively come into the light of our knowledge, was, in spite of all, never wholeheartedly attacked. The criticisms that it has long been the fashion of historical researchers to level at the scheme mean nothing. They have only obliterated the one existing plan without substituting for it any other. To toy with phrases such as the Greek Middle Ages or Germanic Antiquity does not in the least help us to form a clear and inwardly convincing picture in which China and Mexico, the Empire of Aksum, and that of the Sassanids have their proper places. And the expedient of shifting the initial point of modern history from the Crusades to the Renaissance, or from the Renaissance to the beginning of the 19th century, only goes to show that the scheme per se is regarded as unshakably sound. It is not only that the scheme circumscribes the area of history. What is worse, it rigs the stage. The ground of West Europe is treated as a steady pole, a unique patch chosen on the surface of the sphere for no better reason, it seems, than because we live on it. And great histories of millennial duration, and mighty far-away cultures, are made to revolve around this pole in all modesty. It is a quaintly conceived system of sun and planets. We select a single bit of ground as the natural centre of the historical system and make it the central sun. From it, all the events of history receive their real light. From it, their importance is judged in perspective. But it is in our own West European conceit alone that this phantom world history, which a breath of scepticism would dissipate, is acted out. We have to thank that conceit for the immense optical illusion, become natural from long habit, whereby distant histories of thousands of years, such as those of China and Egypt, are made to shrink to the dimensions of mere episodes, while in the neighbourhood of our own position, the decades since Luther, and particularly since Napoleon, loom large as Brocken spectres. We know quite well that the slowness with which a high cloud or a railway train in the distance seems to move is only apparent. Yet we believe that the tempo of all early Indian, Babylonian or Egyptian history was really slower than that of our own recent past. And we think of them as less substantial, more damped down, more diluted, because we have not learnt to make the allowance for inward and outward distances. It is self-evident that for the cultures of the West, the existence of Athens, Florence, or Paris is more important than that of Loyang or Pataliputra. But is it permissible to found a scheme of world history on estimates of such a sort? If so, then the Chinese historian is quite entitled to frame a world history in which the Crusades, the Renaissance, Caesar, and Frederick the Great are passed over in silence as insignificant. How, from the morphological point of view, should our 18th century be more important than any other of the 60 centuries that preceded it? Is it not ridiculous to oppose a modern history of a few centuries, and that history to all intents localized in West Europe, to an ancient history which covers as many millennia, incidentally dumping into that ancient history the whole mass of the pre-Hellenic cultures, unprobed and unordered, as mere appendix matter? This is no exaggeration. Do we not, for the sake of keeping the hoary scheme, dispose of Egypt and Babylon, each as an individual and self-contained history quite equal in the balance to our so-called world history from Charlemagne to the World War, and well beyond it, as a prelude to classical history? Do we not relegate the vast complexes of Indian and Chinese culture to footnotes with a gesture of embarrassment? As for the great American cultures, do we not, on the ground that they do not fit in, with what, entirely ignore them? The most appropriate designation for this current West European scheme of history, in which the great cultures are made to follow orbits round us as the presumed centre of all world happenings, is the Ptolemaic system of history. The system that is put forward in this work in place of it I regard as the Copernican discovery in the historical sphere, in that it admits no sort of privileged position to the classical or the Western culture, as against the cultures of India, Babylon, China, Egypt, the Arabs, Mexico. Separate worlds of dynamic being which, in point of mass, count for just as much in the general picture of history as the classical, while frequently surpassing it in point of spiritual greatness and soaring power.